Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Chase Robinson, and I'm director of the Smithsonian's Freer Gallery of Art and Arthur M. Sackler Gallery. The Freer and Sackler, Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art, is located, as many of you will know, on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. The museum houses an exceptional collection of some 45,000 pieces of Asian and Middle Eastern art. And it's through our exhibitions and programs such as this that we aim to foster greater understanding of the arts, cultures, and societies of Asia and the Middle East. We're currently closed and have been since March of 2020, but I'm delighted to say that the Freer Gallery will reopen on July 16th, and we invite you to visit us in person soon. We are thrilled in the meantime that you are joining us for the third program in our series, CULINASIA, the future of Asian food in America. A collaboration with Smithsonian Associates and the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center, this free series explores food legacies and the ways in which Asian diaspora cuisine continues to change and enrich our lives. Tonight, and in the next program on June 23rd, we'll hear from chefs, food writers, food entrepreneurs, home cooks, cookbook authors, and other participants whose heritage and experiences span the complex spectrum of Asian diaspora identities in the United States. They'll be discussing the successes, the challenges, the future of Asian food in America. The series received federal support from the Asian Pacific American Initiatives Pool, which is administered by the Smithsonian's Asian Pacific American Center. Before I turn the mic over to our esteemed guests, I'd like to thank members and supporters of the Smithsonian. If you'd like more information about how you can support us, we've put some links to information in the chat. Now, I'd like to introduce the curator of the series, Simone Jacobson, who will also be your moderator for the evening. A cultural connector, Simone Jacobson is a co-owner of the DC Burmese American restaurant, Thumi. With over 15 years of experience in arts and cultural management, she's contributed to events at the National Museum of Asian Art, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and the Museum of Food and Drink in New York. Her writing has been published in Washington Post, Eater, Gawker, and Fusion. Now, please join me in welcoming Simone Jacobson.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Chase. And thank you so much to all of you who are joining us today for the third program in our CULINASIA series. I know that all of you are familiar with Zoom by now, but before we turn over to our guests, I'd like to quickly point out a few key features that will enhance your virtual experience this evening. We have so many great guests with us tonight that we won't have time for a traditional Q&A, but we do encourage you to make comments in the chat and to keep your eyes there for links and information from us. If you experience technical issues and you need to contact our Smithsonian staff, you can also do that in the chat box. It's the Q&A box for chat. The program will wrap in about an hour and a half. You may have also noticed that this program includes an ASL interpreter, as well as closed captioning. And if you prefer to hide the captions, you can click the CC or closed caption icon on the toolbar. And finally, please take a moment to complete the exit survey at the end of the program. I can tell you that we read every single comment and we really value your feedback in this new forum for learning. Now, a few words about our panelists today. Kim Pham is co-founder of Amsam, a proud and loud Asian food brand. She has been building community in early stage startups since she was 16. Prior to co-founding Amsam, Kim was most recently head of platform at Frontline Ventures in London, where she was named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2017. Chef Katsuya Fukushima is partner and executive chef of Daikaya Restaurant Group in Washington, D.C., which includes Daikaya, Bantam King, Haikan, and Hatoba. Before embarking on his own culinary career in 2010, Fukushima worked closely with his mentor, Chef Jose Andres. And in addition to holding positions as executive chef of Jose Andres Catering by Ridgewell's, executive chef for TFG's special projects, and head chef of Cafe Atlantico, Fukushima played an instrumental role in opening both the critically acclaimed Mini Bar by Jose Andres in Washington, D.C., and the Bazaar by Jose Andres in Los Angeles. He has been featured in a variety of media outlets, from the Washington Post and Washingtonian to Wine Spectator and Bon Appetit. Dale Taldi is the co-owner of Food Crush Hospitality. His passion for cooking began at a young age in his native Chicago, where he learned to prepare meals alongside his mother in the kitchen. The proud son of Filipino immigrants, he grew up immersed in his family's cultural heritage while also enjoying the life of a typical American kid. Dale applied this distinct Asian American experience to the menu of his eponymous restaurant Taldi, which opened in Brooklyn's Park Slope neighborhood in 2012. He went on to open Taldi in Miami and also in Jersey City. And in 2018, Dale and his partner in both life and business, Agnes, built foodcrushhospitality.com. In addition to his work in the kitchen, Dale was also a 3-time chef testant. You may have seen him on Bravo's Emmy award-winning culinary show, Top Chef. He has competed on Chopped, Iron Chef America, Knife Fight, and was head judge on Knife Fight Season 4. His first cookbook, Asian American, was published in 2015. Sana Javeri Kadri is the founder of Diaspora Co., a direct trade spice company working towards radically equitable, sustainable, and more delicious spice supply chain. Born and raised in Mumbai, India, amongst a big family of idealists and architects, she has over a decade of experience in every facet of the food industry and supply chain, from farm worker to line cook to marketing consultant. She founded Diaspora Co. in 2017, and it has quickly become a nationally acclaimed, I would argue internationally acclaimed, beloved food brand that supports over 300 small Indian farmers and laborers, and growing, and aims to set a new standard for what equity in our food system can look like. She currently lives between Mumbai, India, and Oakland, California. And finally, Khushbu Shah is the restaurant editor at Food and Wine magazine. Previously, Khushbu wrote pieces about the national and international food scene for GQ, Bon Appetit, and Eater. She helped launch the Mike Food section and was the senior food features editor at Thrillist, and she is currently based in Los Angeles, California. Now, because we're exploring the future of Asian food in America, our event format and approach is a little bit non-traditional also. Tonight, we'll be folding in the speakers, sort of the way that bakers do with their ingredients. And so our conversation will begin with 3 of the 5 speakers, Dale, Katsuya, and Khushbu, in just a few moments. And then we'll be joined by Kim and Sana. And finally, we'll close the program by bridging the gap between generations with participation from a group of junior students from Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, Texas, who are also officers and members of their school's Asian Student Union. And in between their work, rehearsals, and currently, like at this moment, currently their AP exams, we're going to be joined by Maya Reddy, Aiden Singh, Gavin Yee, and Asia Kayanan. They've been invited to ask the panelists a few questions of their own to close out tonight's virtual discussion. And before we look to the future, we're going to come right back here to the present. Please join me in welcoming our first 3 speakers, Dale, Katsuya, and Khushbu. Welcome, welcome to our virtual stage, beautiful humans. Hello, hello. How's everybody feeling?
Sorry, I think my eyes are watering. I recently moved to Los Angeles, and I'd never thought I had allergies in my life, but I think the city is proving me wrong in many ways. So
I thought you were getting emotional with the
also
power.
That. I'm just
in the feelings.
Every single time I see Dale's face, I want to cry. So
I understand. I'm very moved. Very moved. Dale, I'm going to go ahead and invite you to turn your mic on also. And we can start with Khushbu since you're here. and you're ready. But I wanted to just get right into it with the three of you. If we could talk a little bit about your family history and culture, how your parents, how, why, when they came to the United States, and how that's impacted your career trajectory.
Yeah. So my parents, I'm very much kind of a quintessential South Asian American child of immigrants. My parents are from India. They immigrated in the early 80s as part of this huge wave that kind of came post 1965, where, the borders were opened up to a lot of Indians and other South Asians with graduate degrees. And then they, family immigration, chain immigration started happening because of that. So my uncle was the first to come. He grew up in a city in India that was 110 degrees most of the year, and went and got an engineering degree in Cornell. So that was quite a shift in, the 1970s, where there was no Indian stores, no nothing. My dad's a doctor, my mom's a dentist. I very much thought I was going to become an ER doctor. Somehow ended up in food writing instead, much to the chagrin of my parents, who still call me and let me know I can always go back to medical school. So yeah, I grew up I'm very blessed to have a mom who is a phenomenal cook. And my dad can make one thing very well, and that's his masala chai. But my mom is a phenomenal cook, but it was always, Indian food for the most part. Every once in a while, like Mexican food, very like American Mexican food, and maybe some pasta with, jarred ragu sauce on it, or Prego if that was on sale. And if I wanted anything else, I had to figure it out myself. So I think that's how I really got into food, because I grew up in very suburban Michigan, but I was very much the child of the Food Network generation. So I'd come home, I'd watch like Aina, Giada, and then I'd go do my homework. And the moment I got my license, I remember driving to like the 2 international markets in town and buying every single sauce I could find. And, I was too broke to like buy the magazines, but I would drive to the bookstore and take photos or like handwrite recipes from like Food and Wine or Bon Appetit, bring them home. And my mom still yells at me about stocking her pantry a little too hard and never quite cleaning, cooking through all of it before I left. But yeah, that's how I got into food. And initially I railed against writing, about Indian food. I didn't want to be the Indian food writer, who only wrote about Indian food. So
a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. Also, I just didn't want to pigeonhole myself. I care about stories from across the, culinary universe. But then also at a certain point, I got sort of sick of just, white men writing about, brown hands, basically, and started, to dabble in writing about, my South Asian heritage too. And here we are.
Here we are. Well, your story makes me think of when my mom arrived to the States around the same time as your parents from Burma, and all the leaves were falling off the trees in Washington, D.C., and she thought it was like the apocalypse. She thought it was the end of the world. She's like, I've never seen leaves fall off the trees. Why are the trees dying? So I totally relate to that. Katsuya, tell us a little bit about your family background and how it's impacting the work that you're doing.
So I was born in Okinawa, a little island off of Japan, the main island of Japan. My mom is from a little island, even smaller than Okinawa, called Miyakojima. And my dad is also from a little island, which is the biggest island of Hawaii, from Hilo. So my dad met my mom because he was in the military. And yeah, they fell in love. He didn't speak any Japanese. She didn't speak any English, but they spoke the language of love, and they got together and they had me in Okinawa. So my dad's a great cook. My mom is also a great cook. And so I grew up eating great Hawaiian food, great Japanese food. But I grew up at a time when a night out was maybe like Shakey's Pizza in California, or like a Chinese restaurant, or McDonald's was a big night for us. So it was at the time there was not. I mean, pizza was foreign. you know. And then when I went to school and my mom would pack me up bentos, kids would be like, "Whoa, what is that? What's that? Rice and what is that?" You know. So next day I'd be like, "Mom, you need to pack me bologna and cheese and send me on my way because I'm gonna get shaded at school." So yeah, so I grew up eating really good, authentic Japanese food, but I was embarrassed of it. And so it's funny because then I went to culinary school. I went to a French school. I ended up working for American chefs, and then I ended up with this Spanish guy named Jose Andres. And
I don't think anyone's heard of him. He's kind of like,
he was a little guy. He was a little guy, kind of quiet. You know, he was my mentor. He taught me a lot. And yeah, the rest was history, you know. So, but it's funny. It's just the way that food has grown and has, you know, I didn't think I was ever gonna do Japanese food. You know, I went to Spain. I worked with Jose's old mentor, this guy named Ferran Adria, and
wow.
you know, I came back and you know, I was like, I'm gonna do this molecular gastronomy thing, and I'm, you know, rock the world, open up mini bar. And now I'm slinging noodles for like, you know, for a living. So, you know, who knew? But, you know, it's come full circle. I'm happy. My dad finally comes to the restaurants that I have, you know, that I'm cooking. So, you know, it's like that stamp of approval. It's very, very satisfying.
Yeah. How did that happen though then? I mean, what happened between, you know, doing the European style cooking and how did you find your way back to Japanese cooking?
So, yeah, you know, I was like, I love Japanese food. I eat it at home. I go home to my parents. You know, they don't let me touch anything when I go home. You know, my dad's like, sit, mom's cooking, my dad's cooking, and they never let me do anything. And so I was like, you know, I'm not, you know, it's Japanese food. And so I was like, I gotta do French or I gotta do Spanish or I gotta do something European. And this is the food that's me. You know, I realized, you know, when I went to Japan that this is like, I now understand why I am the way I am because my travels to Japan. And I'm so happy that I found Japanese cooking. And that was truly luck because my business partner, Jose, Daisuke and Yama, you know, they were like, "Oh, we're going to open up this Japanese restaurant. You want in?" I'm like, "Yes, yes."
Mm-hmm.
So you know, it just happened and I'm just very blessed.
And DC is so blessed to have you. Those are some of my favorite restaurants in the whole city.
Thank you.
And thank you for training all of our cooks. We love you for that. They're amazing.
Thank you.
Dale, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I am the son of Filipino immigrants. They landed here in the late 60s, early 70s with the healthcare. You know, when the U.S. was giving green cards to people who were healthcare professionals. So my mom came as a nurse, and that's why you see a ton of Filipinos as nurses. It's kind of why they all landed here. My dad followed after that, and he was a tradesman. He was a welder, he fixed boilers. And I mean, like all of us, I think, you know, we as immigrants, we like eating well is a birthright for us. It's just expected. So, you know, I got this later in life that my mom was a fantastic cook, but no one ever said anything about it because she knew it was good and everyone expected it to be good. The only time you get any words at a table is something's wrong. When there's questions being asked at like an immigrant table, like, "Hey, how did you make this?" If someone asks you how you made your adobo, it's because it's not right. Or still, right? If someone is questioning how you made, you know, how you made a dish at these tables, it should be quiet. Our tables are generally quiet, or if there's talking, it's not about food. It's just talking about, like, you know, they're busting on somebody. And that's how I got into food. My mom's a fantastic cook. She's one of 8 sisters. There's 3 brothers, so she's one of like 12. My grandfather in the family was a great cook. My grandmother wasn't the cook. And yeah, I just fell in love with food. I mean, like Kushbu, I was, I started watching food TV really early with PBS and the Great Chef series. That's what hooked me, hook, line, and sinker. But you would see these, and there was never anyone that looked like, it's like the NBA for me. You would watch that, and there would only be white dudes in white jackets with white toques cooking white food. There was never us, unless we were the dude passing over something that was just cooked to that chef, and then he finished plating it, and then he just kind of shooed you away. I mean, it was everywhere in all those kitchens, and but that it fascinated me. That world fascinated me. So that's how I got into cooking. I mean, it was Martin Yan, it was Emerald, the early, those early dump and stir cooking shows. But Martin Yan was probably the dude who I was just like, I cannot miss this show. It was so intriguing, right? You saw his hands and how fast he moved, and even though we are Filipino and we have some Chinese ingredients, like they're all foreign. A lot of the technique was super foreign. Like I never saw. Filipino cuisine is a lot of put in a pot and let it cook it to death. And his was real fast and precise, and techniques that I'd never seen before. So that's kind of how I got into cooking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's interesting because the only cooking show I remember watching with my mom, who is also a chef in our restaurant, is did you guys ever see Two Fat Ladies?
Yes.
Yes.
I just remember this one episode where they literally coated the entire bowl with butter and then bacon and then something, maybe breadcrumbs and just like more bacon, and they had the little scooter and one of them would ride in the side. And I think that all of us are from a time, and actually we can say anyone born before, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago is of a time that, we're just now seeing people like you, Dale, on television, like Jet Tila, and, we're at the beginning. And sometimes I think like, wow, the young people, and I'm really excited to talk with these students later, these young people, they're just coming into a world where it is normal. It's normalized to see Black and brown, and specifically like people from their family and culture on television. I don't think are at the point where all cultures are represented equally, but the lack of representation in both the food media and just media in general is something I think that we're going to dig into a little bit, because it's important. If you don't see yourself, then you're not able to imagine. And so thank you to all of you, because you're making that possible for people. I want to shift over to Kushbu a little bit, because one of the things we've been talking about leading up to this discussion, and in general, and I think the food communities with Asian and Asian American chefs, is that there was this long period of time, I don't know, 1900s-ish, until very recently, where we saw immigrant ownership of restaurants as like a survival method, right? We weren't able to do other jobs, or we didn't have the language or other resources. And so I think, Kushbu, you just referred to it as chain immigration. And it's sort of like chain restaurant, but not in the way we think of it, right? It was like, well, my uncle had a restaurant, or my brother had a restaurant, and that's a way to get here, or that's a way to make money. That's a way to do something we know how to do. But recently, that social advancement via food thing has kind of shifted to second and third generation entrepreneurs like Dale and like Katsuya, and also like Kim and Sana that are going to join us later. We still have this desire to preserve culture, which I think is the common thread between that first wave, and maybe there are waves in between that we could define. But what have you seen in the work that you've been doing? Because you haven't just been in one type of publication. You've been in food publications, you've been in culture publications as both an eater and a writer. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've seen that shift happen, or when you might identify that shift happen?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing that's been happening over the last few years, especially as someone who, travels the country for my job, and like I literally eat through all the restaurants, as well as many as I can. There's so many restaurants in this country, but the the coolest thing that's happening is I feel like restaurants are becoming, especially Asian restaurants, becoming more and more unapologetic. There's less having to cater to a white audience. Like you can see it now. There's Chinese restaurants, American Chinese restaurants that are opening without, a General Tso's chicken, and like they'll be okay. There's like Indian restaurants that are opening without butter chicken on the menu, without chicken tikka masala, things that like they're still they'll still get the customers walk in looking for a Thai restaurants opening without pad Thai on the menu. People walk in and like not see it and still walk out. There are those customers, but for the most part, they're seeing a lot of success by really like leaning into whatever it is that they're trying to do, whether it's like super like hyper regional, you're starting to see a lot more like hyper regional Asian food too, which is super cool. Most of us, I think on this, all of us on this call can probably differentiate between Northern Thai food, like Isan, Thai cooking, and Southern Thai cooking, which I don't think, maybe even 5 years ago was like really part of the conversation. Most of us have, there's Burmese restaurants, you're starting to get, regional Indian restaurants. Like, it's very cool to start to see that a lot of Indonesian restaurants, Malaysian restaurants, like it's not just general pan-Asian restaurants anymore either that people are like being forced to open. Like you can get way more, you can, also zone in on just one dish. Like with ramen, you see that, right? Like, there's a restaurant in Oakland that specializes in soba, and it's one of the few places in the entire country that makes 100% like buckwheat soba noodles. And it's amazing. It's incredible that this business can be, can thrive and is like so busy today. Yeah.
I mean, one thing we think about a lot at the Me, for example, is like, how do you create a craving and then not just create it, but then create and sustain a craving for cuisines or even niches within that cuisine that people have never heard of? Do you think that, people like you who are really like conscious of changing that media landscape just by virtue of being, is it the media? Is it more traveling? Like what is it that has helped these businesses to be able to, like you said, be loud, proud, like Amsam's, tagline, right? Loud and proud. Is it just a generational change? Like we've passed the torch over to this next generation? Or, I mean, I still kind of struggle to figure out where did we get to tip? How did we get to tip? Or did we just stop feeling like we needed permission?
No, I think it's a confluence of a lot of things. I think the internet is like a huge part of it, right? Like social media, as much as we love to hate it, is also one of the biggest and coolest tools that has come about, for not much money and honestly not even that much effort. Like you can, I mean, obviously the more effort, like there are people, it pays off, but like you can just with a couple clicks, like put your food up there, and be like, hey, this is cool. Or like someone can share it. You don't have to wait for an article in a magazine, which has like a limited amount of print space. There's only so much content that they can put in to be able to like talk about something and have a conversation about something or share something or, send a photo, like be like, hey, this is like a cool thing. I mean, I've been talking, I remember talking to chefs and like them being like, yeah, we used to wait for like these cookbooks to come out, from these like legendary restaurants in Europe or whatever, because it was the only way to see what other people were doing, because you can't afford to like go fly and like do that. And if the TV shows, the limited cooking shows like weren't covering it, like you kind of didn't really have access to a lot of this stuff. But like thanks to like, social media, YouTube is like amazing. YouTube is the best. I mean, there's all of these. Some of my favorite channels are the ones that are set up in like kind of remote Indian villages where they're just cooking. Like it's unbelievable the stuff that they're able to do. I'm like, these people would, run laps around so many of these chefs running these like Michelin starred restaurants. But like the techniques you can learn just from that, on a Friday night at like 9 p.m. when you're randomly bored is like, it's incredible the knowledge that's out there. I mean, the proliferation of food television. I mean, there's so much out there now. Like, yes, there's still a lot of problems with it, but it's cool. It's Top Chef's on what, season 18 now or something like ridiculous. Like, I actually learned about Halo Halo through Dale in Top Chef, like when he like first went on. And so there's been like such a range of contestants that have come on since that have like introduced. Top Chef is one of those shows that hits all parts of America, and it introduces people that might not, I didn't have access to Halo Halo growing up, but like I knew about it. And now, then I like, when I finally was in a city where I could find it, I like sought it out. And I think that's like happening for a lot of people. And yeah, it's food media too. They're becoming more conscious of stuff. the faces are starting to change. I mean, Food and Wine is still quite white, but I will say in my coworkers' defenses, they are quite interested in the global like foodscape, like it's not just French food, it's not just Southern food, they are interested, even if they're not familiar, in finding voices that, they love, our test kitchen loves doing Mexican food. They love doing Indian food. They love doing, all kinds of stuff. And it's cool to see, we had dal on the cover of Food and Wine in January, which I never thought I'd see dal, like the most humble, like Indian dish of all time, like on the cover, of a major food mag. And like, it's pretty cool to see. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's incredible what you're doing there. And also, I mean, we have two chefs here with us, so I'm going to shift over to you guys a little bit. When we did the first panel in this series, it was about saving Chinatown. And the poet laureate of the walk, who is Auntie Grace Young, she was talking about becoming an accidental activist in her role in saving Chinatown, or specifically trying to push money into Chinese restaurants in Chinatown. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the unexpected lessons that you've maybe learned, because I think this question that we've been starting to tackle about how and why and when this happened, it's like we were getting this momentum and then here comes COVID. And now we are also forced to be activists and infectious disease specialists. And, my business partner, Eric, said, I just want to drink boulevardiers and, serve really great Burmese food. But now here I am having to be an expert in the treasury to get these, grant funds. And so I want to talk a little bit from you guys about how you learn these kind of unexpected lessons from the onset of the pandemic, and really like specifically trying to get at, have there been times when you felt compelled to act or speak on behalf of Asian Americans more than you have in the past?
I'll take that. I'll take that.
I'm like, I see Katsuya. It looks like he's warming up. Like he's like, put me in.
Katsuya, please.
Well, in terms of lessons, there was a lot of lessons I learned during this time, and it was a very hard time. But one of the things I did learn was that people reacted to the pandemic differently, and they handled it very differently. Maybe in ways that I didn't really expect. Coming up in the kitchen, it was always like, just suck it up and just get things done. And it wasn't like that. It wasn't. It was a very hard time for many people, and I had to kind of step back and realize that, hey, this suck it up mentality doesn't work anymore, or it doesn't work right now. So I had to really be patient and understanding and take care of my guys, and that was one of the biggest. What else I learned was that here's a big one. Customers aren't always right. That was a big lesson I learned. The restaurant business is broken. That's another one. And here's one that it's a lesson to learn, but I think it's something that needs to be done, which is this whole cheap eats classification. Every magazine has a cheap eats, and I think it's a very wrong labeling of food. It's just not fair for us restaurateurs and chefs and to be labeled as a cheap eats.
Can you say more about that? What you mean by it's not fair? What about the word cheap is triggering?
Cool. The word cheap and cheap in itself is very, I guess, demeaning. It could be a demeaning word. It could be if someone's cheap, it's not very flattering. If a person is cheap or a woman is cheap, it's like, it's just not a great word. And then, so why is it okay to have a restaurant that's a cheap restaurant? It's like you're already at a disadvantage because now everyone expects your food to be cheap, and how can you make a business and make good food when you're already labeled cheap? Because then you got to make cuts in this, you got to make, maybe go to cheaper ingredients or substandard. It's like, it's just not a fair labeling, and it puts us in a very disadvantaged situation. So no more cheap eats.
No more cheap eats. 2021.
Something else. Another
Plus
name.
they're
I don't
hot
know.
dogs.
Costco hot dogs.
I do love hot dogs.
Dale, what about for you? What are some of the more unexpected lessons that you've been grappling with? Katsuyo, I think that almost everyone in the food industry can agree that our restaurants are broken. And then, the kind of like, not only straw that broke the camel's back, but then just like add a pile of weights on top with, Asian American businesses and business owners being targeted in really hateful and horrendous ways. Have you felt, Dale, especially because you have such a big platform, have you also felt like there have been times that you've been called to step out of your comfort zone in this crazy like mountain of lessons that we're learning?
I mean, yeah, of course. I think, we've been the flag bearers and the flag wavers we got into this, right? I mean, Ketsuya, have you ever shaved your head and gone into a kitchen and someone think that you're Latino and start speaking Spanish to you? I mean, that's happened to me. I
think I'm Latino anyway.
100%.
Grow the beard as long as I want.
It just happens. So, I'm from Chicago, so that's what I had to deal with growing up. And yes, you do. You have to stand up for who you are. You have to stand up for, and along the same lines as Katsuya, I think you have to stand up for your staff. You have to stand up and protect your team. When guests come in, they don't want to put a mask on, they don't want to follow the rules, they gotta leave. And I'm certainly not the best person to do that, because I have a very short temper. I don't have patience for that. If you're not gonna, and I think that's something that during this pandemic that's changed for me personally in my business, is there is no second chance. There is no, hey, we need, hey, the guest is always right, the customer is always right. It's a, hey, you've proven to us that as a guest, you do not care about our well-being. So now you are no longer allowed here. And listen, of course, when I have the platform, I'm one of maybe 10 Asian restaurants in Westchester that, there's not a lot of restaurants. That's why one of the reasons why I chose the style of cuisine we're doing, because there just wasn't a lot of them out there. So we have that benefit, but I do believe that we as business people, as Asian Americans, we have to protect the house, right? It's like a casino. At any time where there's something happens in a casino, you step out of line once, it's like Charlie Murphy and if you're a habitual line stepper, you only get that opportunity one time. And in restaurants, that is true. In our restaurant, people are like, oh, do you guys really say these things like, hey, you're a Cantonese restaurant, why are you so expensive? And then you're a party of 20, and then all of a sudden you leave a really shitty tip. There is a do not ask back on that person's. You know what? We're not gonna tell you that we're not gonna say something to you then and there, but you're not gonna be if you're gonna cause our team to not pay their bills, you're not gonna be allowed to eat here. Like Katsuyo was saying, it's broken, right? Restaurants are broken. The whole tipping thing's broken. But I'm not taking the defensive anymore. And neither should Asian Americans in this time. I'm not gonna sit here and wait for you to be nasty to me or to say something out of line to me. I'm gonna hold my head up and watch what happens. And if something gets crazy, I'm gonna defend myself, but I'm gonna take the offensive instead of taking the defensive. And I think that's what a lot of us have to do nowadays. And we're not gonna be your stepping stone. We're not gonna be the person to get whipped on.
I feel like a lot of restaurant owners, especially, restaurant owners of color, are like realizing that not every dollar is worth it anymore. Like that is like the lines that they're drawing, that like it's just they would rather not have your business if like you're gonna be an asshole to their staff, terrible, just like a terrible disruptive person. Like it's just not worth it. That dollar is not worth it.
Yeah, I saw a very cathartic meme today. I think you all would enjoy it. It was a Yelp exchange between a customer and a restaurant owner that was made public. And I don't know, they gave them a really terrible review. It was their literal first day reopening. And the review started, "We really wanted to like this place." I'm sure you guys have seen those reviews. And the owner responded, it was my favorite response I've seen in a long time. The owner responded, "We really wanted to like you too." And so it's like this whole exchange, and I think you're right that every dollar is not worth it, right? And so there's the survival tactics that we've had to use, but then we're also now on full display as representatives of our cultures, our food. And when I say our cultures, I'm not just talking about our ethnic heritage. We're also become sort of elevated in this space of spokespeople for our industry. I know that locally in DC, a lot of people want to know Katsuya's opinion and also his business partners, for you, Kushbu, in the media landscape, and for Dale too. So I'm getting very excited now because I really want to fold in Sana and Kim, and I want to hear a little bit more from them because we have a lot of really engaging questions from our audience too that I want to try to pepper in because they're like chomping at the bit. Hi, Sana. Hi, Kim.
Hello, hello. Queers have entered the chat.
Yes, love it, love it. So I wanted to fold you in. We're gonna go back and then go forward because ultimately what we're here talking about is these misnomers and myths that are really harmful to us. So I want to circle back to that now that we're all together. But before we go forward, Sana, can you tell us a little bit about your family history and about how Diaspora Co. got started and how and why?
Yeah. Well, actually, before I do any of those things, I wanted to, y'all mentioned of whose dollars are worth it or not. And as a
go there.
Yeah, I have to jump because I have so
go
many.
There, yes.
Well, which is just that, we have a lot of angry customers who email us being like, well, why do you have to call yourself a queer business? Like, what does sex have to do with it? And we have to always like backtrack them off of the ledge and kind of be like, it's a value system around equity and liberation and freedom and joy. And it has nothing to do with sex. And I don't understand why you are so hurt, why you have so much hurt in your heart. And then also folks are like, I was going to support you, but I don't like your politics. And I'm like, we don't want your dirty, tainted blood money anyway. Like, we'll find other money. We've been fine so far. We don't need you. And I think a lot of white ladies get real like worked up about that. And we have actually found that in CX roles, it's better to have a white woman in the role than have a person of color. And even if that's just changing the name at the bottom, because like they will react differently based on what name they see there. And I've often found that actually I, despite being the founder, get treated way worse than my white CX manager. We've had all kinds of experiences around that. We've just had to draw some real boundaries, and this whole idea that the customers will always right, we call full bullshit on it. But getting into who I am, my family history. So I was born and raised in Mumbai. I'm a third generation Mumbaikar. I'm a very unique blend of being Gujarati Jain, like Kush, Gujarati Muslim, not like anybody here. And then Pakistani Punjabi with a little bit of South African and Iranian thrown in. But all of those parts of my family immigrated to Mumbai in different ways over different times and kind of melted into this wacky family. And I also come from 3 generations of architects who were a big part of kind of building post-colonial Mumbai. So there was a lot of conversations. There was a lot of idealism in my family, first of all, of like, what is social? Like one of the earliest conversations my dad would have with me is like, baby Sana, like, what is social change and how will you affect it? And I'm just like, Dad, I was 5. Like, what is wrong with you? But those were the things that we talked about. And, how can you use architecture and buildings as a way to redesign cities to be more thoughtful and sustainable and like people focused. That was my childhood. It was not focused on food really at all. But I think I negotiated a lot of things through the lens of food because I was bringing, my family was all these different cultures, and we were bringing all of those foods to our dinner table. And I was having to understand, like, why does my Gujarati Jain grandma make chai completely differently than my Punjabi Pakistani grandma? And like, why is the Punjabi Pakistani one given greater importance because it's somehow richer and like, I don't know, more like North Indian culture is superior, whereas the Gujarati Jain one is somehow not as good or not as valuable. So I was navigating a lot of these very regional complexities growing up in this sort of melting pot of Mumbai. And I moved to the US 8 years ago for undergrad. I thought I would stay here 4 years and then dip. But I fell in love. I came out as queer. I came to love a lot of America, especially my queer community here. And I found the ethnic aisle to be really whack, which Kim and I share in common. And I felt like, maybe we can change this. Like, what if we built something new? And I was working at Byret in San Francisco at the time, which is this wonderful, very farm to table focused grocery store. And I started with a simple hypothesis. If I figure out where turmeric grows and who's growing it, maybe like 2 stores and 2 chefs will buy it, Byret being one of them, I hope. And they'll basically consume turmeric lattes that are not, I don't know, sponsored by Gwyneth Paltrow and actually like profiting Indian farmers. And that tiny little idea in 2016, plus my 2016 tax refund of $3K, kind of grew and grew and grew. And we now have 25 spices and a team of 12. And yeah, that's me.
And I just have to shout you from the rooftops. Can you tell me a little bit about your recent announcement about the massive sums of money that you're putting into these farmers' pockets?
Yes, I was like, shit, Simone, which secrets did I tell you that I shouldn't share on here?
Well, you told the world, but I felt like you were just talking to me. I felt so special. I read it on my phone like it was directed to me.
So I truly did start this company with $3K for my tax refund. We just like recycled that cash flow ever since then. We're still bootstrapped. And in 2019, we paid what I thought was an exorbitant sum of money to 4 farm partners. That was $69,000. And I was like, that's more than I've ever earned in my life. It's amazing. We're giving that to 4 Indian farmers. And this year, we're going to send directly to farm partners, to 40 farm partners, $1.2 million, which really, really blows my baby mind.
And it blows ours too. You are constantly blowing our minds, mine especially. We are having a very fan moment. And thank you for this pride background. It's really just like all the things that we needed today. Kim, tell us a little bit about your family.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kim. So I started Som with my sister, actually. So it's literally a family story. Last name, hey. But we are the first generation Vietnamese American daughters of refugees. My parents came here post 1975 after the fall of Saigon. And kind of growing up, and Sana talks about this, right? Like we were in a 98% white town. And for a long time, Vanessa and I had immense and deeply internalized shame around who we are. And like part of that experience was walking down the mainstream grocery store and experiencing this kind of quote unquote ethnic aisle, right? Like it's kind of this hodgepodge of ingredients across various POC communities. And it never made us really feel like seen or celebrated. And growing up, like we left home and went to university, but really food was for us like the way that we began to like re-engage with our identities. I come from like a very small Vietnamese family. There's not a huge Vietnamese community in Boston, but whenever, I moved to New York, whenever I wanted to re-engage with the language or even just like with that part of my soul, food was kind of the first stop. And so as Vanessa and I were like, post 2016 election in this place of like, oh my gosh, the world feels so wrong. What can we kind of do in our own ways to build the world that we want to see, right? As corny as that sounds, food was kind of the first thing, that North Star of like, how can we really kind of reclaim and celebrate the multitudes within Asian flavors and Asian stories, which for so long have been diluted or compromised or frankly whitewashed. And so, yeah, that was really kind of the impetus of Om Som. And the best way to kind of describe it is that Om Som is rooted in the Vietnamese phrase Om Som, which if you're Vietnamese, it's actually kind of a negative term. My parents would chastise Vanessa and I for like rattling around in the back of the car. They'd be like, don't be so Om Som. And we love this idea of like reclaiming what was this like negative, don't be so rowdy, don't be loud, don't be in your face, taking that back and really taking that unapologetic energy to all of what we do. And so, yeah, I mean, there's little peaks of those Vietnamese roots in everything that we do. And yeah, it's just such an honor and a privilege to get to work on it every day.
I just want to say I love the story behind the name. I'm just like obsessed with that. I just like a quick aside, I've been wanting to do a story on like all these there's like a new wave of Indian restaurants that have opened that also have these kind of like rebellious names, like Dhamaka, Besharam, Badmash. These are all things that would have they would have been like considered insults, but now these are just like proudly like the names that like
I love that.
Yeah, there's a whole generation that was like, Taj Mahal, like Palace of India, and now it's all like every single iteration of like rebel that you can find is like the name of the restaurant. Anyway, I love that. That's great.
For the Vietnamese community, it's like pho 99, pho 54, and so yeah, it's just like, how can we give a middle finger to what so much of Asian Americana is like flattened and erased with, right? And it's this idea of being like submissive, model minority, docile, and we're just like, fuck that. Let's be loud.
I love it. I think I mentioned this at the beginning. It's like, I feel like everything has become way more unapologetic, and it's like, it's very cool to see that.
But I think also in that unapology or lack of apology is also like, pride, right? I mean, we're in Pride Month now, but Asian American pride and then specific cultural pride. I think what's interesting about what you're doing, Kim, you and Vanessa, is that you have opened the door, to these chef partnerships and these other collaborations. Can you tell people that are just tuning in or that kind of maybe might not be familiar? I feel like it's impossible not to be familiar with you all. You're just the explosion. I loved watching all the growth, and the branding is insane, and it's so engaging and joyful and like fierce. But tell people a little bit about like actually what you do, and maybe about like, why not just Vietnamese? Why did you open it up to all these different chefs and cuisines?
Yeah. So for those, thank you so much for all your kind words. My God, I'm like deeply uncomfortable taking compliments. So I'm working through that. But Om Som is a proud and loud Asian food brand. We partner with iconic Asian chefs to craft what we call starters. They're basically these little M&M packets with everything that you need to cook a specific Asian dish. So all of the aromatics, spices, seasonings, oils, vinegars, etc. And one of I noticed this question in the chat, and I would love to hear everyone's thoughts on this. But one of the first things when we started working on this business, we constantly got asked like, oh, is this authentic? And we thought a lot about this word, like it's a heavy loaded word, right? And for us, what we realized that our North Star when we think about authenticity is less so about an end product as opposed to it is a process. So what we mean by that is like, yes, we are Vietnamese sisters, but we can't purport to tell people how to eat Filipino food. We can't purport to tell people how to eat Korean food. And so it was built into the Om Som business model day one that we involve chefs of these backgrounds every step of the way, literally from choosing the dish all the way through sourcing through to marketing. And they're compensated equitably. They get a royalty for all their products sold. So it's not just like a one-time engagement of like, hey, here's a couple grand, you're good to go. But it's literally like built into our model that, if we make money, they make money. And that was super, super important to us from day one. And so, yeah, it's been really amazing. We work with these tastemakers. These are all folks who have like cut their teeth in these cuisines. They run restaurants. They have James Beard nominated cookbooks. Like they have built their legacy on these cuisines. And we're really just there to give them a platform to be able to like tell their story through our products. But yeah, it's just been such an honor to work with these folks. I mean, they're badass. In the beginning, it was literally Vanessa and I like running around to restaurants being like, hi, I know we're nobody, but like, can you trust us with some of your vision? But now they're like absolutely the cornerstone on which we've built like so much of our business. But yeah, I mean, it started out like really with this desire of like, we're third culture Asian Americans, right? And like this idea of being third culture, like what does that mean? And so for us to truly honor that, it wasn't just like a Vietnamese American story. It kind of felt like, what is Asian Americana? We're not a monolith, and like how can we tell our own story within that? And so we work with Southeast Asian chefs. So we have a Vietnamese, Italian, Filipino product, and we have an East Asian line with Japanese, Korean, and Chinese chefs. And again, like nothing is meant to be representative, but really just a celebration of a specific dish that each of these chefs love.
We love it. I love it. I love them so much. But I think that's the perfect kind of segue now that we're all in the room together, the Zoom room. I want to talk about really just the crux, right? Why it's harmful, because I think for us it's kind of obvious, right? Because it's such a, at least I'll say for my family and for all of us in our restaurant, it's a visceral response. Like Katsuya was starting to scratch at this earlier a little bit, but like really getting to, I'd like for us to try to express to people who are here with us that might not have had the same experiences that all of us have had, why, like specifically why it's harmful for media, for guests, for other, I know Dale in one of our earlier conversations was saying like, one of the biggest barriers we need to get past is ourselves. So I just want to just put it out to all of you. Why is it harmful to label our food as fast, ethnic, cheap, casual? Why are those monikers specifically? I feel like cheap and ethnic are the ones that just kind of make all our signals go. So I kind of want to, let's start with Sana, because I think that, those are, as a spice company, where people are used to, let's say, turmeric being cheap, or not even just the spice itself, but grocery items, right? Why are these labels, why are these monikers so harmful?
Yeah. So, you can get a 2-pound bag of turmeric at the Indian store for $12 or significantly less. We sell a 70-gram jar of turmeric for $12. And initially, obviously, there was a lot of blowback against that. And I think what I have always try to stay rooted in is the legacy of the harm and the oppression of the spice trade goes back to the 1500s. And like from then, or actually technically the 1200s, but like ever since then, the farmers have never made money in this system. So if we're talking about what, like 600 years of oppression, your $12 for 2 pounds price, so you're like $6 a pound price, like that's rooted in 600 years of oppression. And that system has never changed. So I'm often trying, and we were very honest in the early days where I would actually make pie charts of like $12 jar of turmeric. This is where the money is going. I need you to understand why this is our model. And we were really keen on being transparent about that to show that it is, especially when you're doing direct to consumer, which is primarily our model, it is possible to pay farmers way more. So our average across all of our spices is 6x the commodity price. And people are often like, well, why aren't you fair trade? And I get really, really salty about this because fair trade is defined as a 15% premium on top of the commodity price. If the commodity price is $1, how does 15% help anything? Like, how does it begin to address the fact that your workers are migrant workers who are getting paid, peanuts every day and don't have stable housing? How is that supposed to address the fact of climate change and your access to water? How is that supposed to address the fact that like seeds are largely becoming privatized and you actually have to buy your seed every year rather than actually seed save it? So, we are paying a premium of 6x that, and to conventional private equity and VCs, they're like, well, that's just bad business. And I'm like, well, actually, my farmers all own access to their seed because they're seed saving heirloom varieties, and they're investing in climate resilient farming techniques. So it's actually the smartest form of business for the future and for the next 100 years of doing business. I have rambled, so I'm going to stop there.
I think everyone is just like taking furious notes. If I wasn't here with you moderating, that's what I'd be doing. That would be my happy nerd space. I'm looking at Kim and Katsuya on the screen, and you're looking like you wanna jump in. Go for it. Don't be shy.
No, I'm just in awe of Sana. That's what
Yeah, I
that
think
facial
everyone
feature
is.
was.
It's like before we got on, Dale was talking about, if, not before we got on, when we were just getting into things, and Dale was talking about, if people are talking at the table, then there's a problem. I think you have silenced this group of very smart people, Sana. So there's no ramble. We all just got like stunned for a second. We got stunned into admiration, pure admiration. No, but I think this is all really important. Kushbu, I know you had dropped something into the chat earlier, but I didn't have a chance to see it. Was that on this topic of the word cheap specifically?
No, it was about I wrote a big piece about the customer is not always right, about like just the insane customer entitlement in the restaurant industry. If you want ridiculous anecdotes, definitely Google that story. It makes you rage. You feel really bad for anyone who's ever opened a restaurant ever. No, for me, I actually, it's maybe controversial. I don't struggle with the terms as much as I struggle with the intention behind them and who's using them. Some of our food is fast. Some of it is cheap. Technically, we are ethnic. It's one of those things, but I always use the term ethnic with quotes around it just because the way it's used here, it's a very othering term. It's to indicate that it's not white, right? To indicate the global doesn't quite cover, or international doesn't quite cover it because that includes white cuisines. And so people use ethnic to be no, it's not that, to discriminate. And so that's where I struggle with the terms, but I don't know, there's a lot of Indian food that is really fast and it's awesome, and there's a lot of Indian food that is really cheap and it's awesome. And same with Vietnamese food, and same with Thai food, and same with Filipino food. We have robust street food cultures, and I think we should be unapologetic about that too. It's just when the expectation is that people will pay $25 for hand rolled pasta, but they won't pay $25 for hand pulled noodles. Same ingredients, same amount of technique, same amount of work. Arguably,
Arguably
more work. Yeah, exactly. But it's when hand-pulled noodles are expected to be at your plate, in 12 minutes, 12 minutes tops, and should only cost $9. But the pasta you'll wait 35 minutes for, and they can charge you $28 for. That's where I start to have issues with the terms. That's where it becomes dangerous. But otherwise, it's all about intention, I think, ultimately, at the end of the day. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I think a lot of this, when I do speak of it, some of the responsibility falls on us, and not on us as this generation, but our generation. We have to
aunties, the bitchy aunties. Yeah,
we have to teach our aunties that listen, man, this isn't that. If you expect Filipino culture to elevate, or if you expect us to keep doing our thing, right, and keep going up and trying to be the best that we can be in this country, because that's why we all came here, right? You can't come into a Filipino restaurant and say it's good and then follow that with a but. It's good. Just say it's good, because this isn't Toro. This isn't one of those places where you walk in and you point at a steam table and food's already, it's been braised and they're putting on a plate and you walk away. It's not that. It is our time. A lot of us are we're in our late 30s, early 40s. We've gone through the ranks in our fields. We are making a name for ourselves, and we are trying to do our thing that's authentic to us. Going back to the term authenticity. Authenticity to me, it just means that my story on a plate, what I'm trying to do. It's not my Lola's adobo. I'm not trying to do my Lola's adobo. I'm not trying to do my mom's adobo. I'm trying to do me, because I grew up in Niles, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, and my house smelled like vinegar and bagoong and shrimp paste. But I also, when I left my house, it was square pizzas and tater tots at, during lunchtime. So for us, it's that's our story. I mean, it's our story. It's our path. Authenticity to me just means that it has to be authentic to who you are, instead of the original recipe of how someone did something. It's that's not me. That will never be us because, you know, I can't get some of those ingredients. God bless people like Andy Ricker, who has dedicated himself to doing, he is a white dude doing Thai food, but he's respecting it. He won't do something if he can't get fresh tamarind leaves. You know what? That ain't fucking me. If I can't find fresh tamarind leaves, I'm gonna go find something that tastes like it to go do it. Right? That's not us. That we don't live in those boxes. But you know, those people who do respect the cuisine to only do soba, 100% buckwheat, that is amazing. We should be, you know, celebrating those restaurants. But it's not to say that we can't celebrate us. But it starts with our aunties, because when they say but it's too expensive, that's when we lessen us as a people, right? As a culture. We lessen brown people food. We do. We ultimately will lessen that. How many times have you heard that Mexican restaurant's awesome, but it's expensive for tacos? Okay, who cares, man? Like tacos should be expensive. They're hand-pressed tortillas. That stuff that is hard work. And people don't see that because it comes from, because of years of us saying, but at the end of eating out and saying, it's good, but it's expensive. It's good, but it's not authentic. It's good, but X, Y, and Z, right? I don't know. So that's my take on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just gonna take a quick time out because we are very excitedly moving into my favorite part of this program tonight. We asked all of the panelists to prepare their like one burning question for each other. And so we're gonna tag each one, and I'm really excited to hear your questions, but also feel free to fold where we're at in. I just wanna start to tag you in, and I'm gonna start with Sana.
Yeah, I get to ask Kush a question, which brings me joy. So my question is, what's the most important legacy for you in your position right now? Like what's the legacy you want to leave?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So a large part of my role is to do this thing called Best New Chefs, which is like a tentpole project that Food and Wine has done for the last 33 years. And, you know, the people that have come out of those classes of chefs include, you know, Daniel Boulou, David Chang, you know, people that have like gone on to become like the chefs, you know, defining generations. And so it's, you know, it's really cool. But for a very long time, a lot of those faces were very homogenous. Like if you look at all the covers, like it's very clear there starts to be like a huge demarcation in the last, you know, 3 or 4 years, where things have started to really shift. It's been really important to me to make that like a very equitable place across the board. But you know, I've involved pastry chefs for the first time, like they count as Best New Chefs. They're running their own kitchens. Like why, you know, and it's where you find a lot of women in the industry still. And so the idea that, you know, they shouldn't count was ridiculous to me, you know, just so I'm trying to break down a lot of walls, which is like the legacy, but also I really want to make sure that like when I'm done with this job, that like there's no more firsts, like, oh, that's our first ever Filipino BNC. Oh, that's our first ever, like, we've never had a queer, you know, woman of color, like be a BNC before. Like, you know, I don't want there to be any more firsts, which means I've done my job. Like I've like gotten to as many cultures as possible, you know, eaten through as many places as possible, like found the talent, like broke down like what counts as best, you know. It's no longer just French fine dining restaurants with people who went to culinary school and all look like Thomas Keller. Yeah, that's my hope. All right, Dale, the question for you is, do you think you'd be more successful than you already are if you were white? Doing your food though.
Yeah. Dude, I think listen, no. I got a fucking chip on my shoulder like a motherfucker. Because I'm 5'5". I'm like tipping the scales like 200 bills right now. And like I think when you have this lack of entitlement, you just fucking push. You just push. And that's what I think. I think I pushed really hard because I have had those awkward conversations with people that said that you're Asian, how could you lead a kitchen? You don't look like you could lead a kitchen. You can't lead these men here. And it was, you couldn't lead these men here. And I was like, all right, well, whatever, dude. But yeah, no, I think that I've had a chip on my shoulder and I push hard, and that's maybe why I'm kind of in the position I'm in. I won't stop. So, Katsia, you said you're Hawaiian, your dad's from Hawaii, and your mom's from Japan. I know this is a thing, like with Hawaiian chefs, are you Hawaiian or are you Japanese? Or are you both?
That's a funny question, because remember when do you remember when we took the SATs and you had to fill in it was
Yes.
it was like white, black, Asian Pacific Islander, Japanese, or I don't know what, but it was
Asian.
like Asian, right? It was a big. I want to put an X in between some of those circles. You know what I mean? So I was never, you know, I was felt like an American. You know, I did for the longest time. You know, for the longest time, and then I did go back to Japan, and I felt, you know, some connections with the Japanese people, and I realized, you know, there's a reason why I am the way I am, and so now I'm definitely Japanese American. You know, I'm not 100% Japanese. When I go to Japan, I don't feel, you know, like I'm truly Japanese, but when I'm here, I don't feel like I'm truly American, you know, or accepted, but I am Japanese American, and Hawaiians are Japanese Americans, man. So,
love it.
Thanks. Kim.
Yeah.
I know you touched on this earlier, but I want to maybe get into a little bit more. It's about the Asian aisle. You guys touched on it, and I just feel like a lot of people still don't understand what we're talking about, because it is one aisle. I saw that Safeway the other day because I was looking for something, and for me, I was like, oh, I know exactly where it is because it's the only aisle. I know where everything is. But I want you to elaborate more about the Asian aisle and maybe what you feel like it should be like.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll try and do this as concisely as possible. So the modern American supermarket as we know it emerged in the 1930s, and the quote unquote ethnic aisle actually formed after World War II, when soldiers from abroad who had had a taste of a lot of these flavors came back, and kind of because of the demand, the ethnic aisle was formed. If you've been to one recently, you'll know it's a hodgepodge of like some Asian ingredients, some like Latinx, Hispanic community ingredients. Like it's a real mix of things. And I guess like, you know, Dale, you have a chip on your shoulder about that. I have a chip on a shoulder also about this ethnic aisle, because, you know, there's definitely the argument of like, oh, you know, it's easy to locate, but inherently that centers around this very like white American view of the modern American diet. And for us, it feels very purposefully othering, right? And even when you think about who gets to decide what is considered ethnic and not, like Italian food, Greek food has largely transcended that, right? And like, what are we reinforcing? What are we perpetuating by creating this delineated aisle? And you know, there's no like silver bullet right answer to reimagining this. For me, it's probably like a really holistic like view of how can we incorporate these foods more closely to their category. So like rice noodles can live alongside pasta, or like a chili oil can live alongside ketchup or barbecue sauce, right? Like really thinking about like the category as opposed to be like, oh, this comes from a non-Western European community, let's toss in the ethnic aisle. So yeah, that's it's hard, right? And it's not perfect, but that's kind of how we've been thinking about it. And Sana, I have a question for you. So, you know, being a D2C founder, being a queer woman, you know, it's messy and it's hard a lot of the times, but I'm curious to hear like what has been giving you unexpected joy as of late, even in the hard times.
A very good one. So I think when I started the company, the imposter syndrome was really real. Primarily, I think mostly because of my age. I was 23, and I just felt like I was nobody. I was a baby. What did I know about the world? And so I was always, I think I avoided and was terrified of hiring people because I was just like, I do not know how to manage them. And also because my own experiences of being managed by white women in the workplace were often so toxic and like, you know, so micromanagey and like folks taking credit for my work, et cetera, et cetera. So in the past year, we've gone from 4 people to, I think we're at 10 now. And managing this team that is a majority queer, majority BIPOC team, and is just very tender and like really go out to bat for each other has been incredible. And I think we're very sensitive to not wanting to overdose on these ideas of like the business is your family or like any of that energy. But we still want to take care of each other and like show up as our full selves. And it's been a privilege and like a total honor that these people want to work with us.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all so much for making all of my panelist tag dreams come true. I really appreciate everyone, not just the panelists, but also the collective Smithsonian institutions that have allowed us to try out these kind of futuristic formats, because I think if we're talking about the future of Asian food, then we have to also we gotta break the mold a little bit on just the asked and answered. So thank you all for being willing to do such dynamic work in such a short little time. Speaking of our future, our next event that is going to be with Asian American farmers is actually a lot of conversation about this idea of reaching back to go forward. That's the title of our panel. Asian American farmers are looking back to go forward. And so we're going to look back a little bit to go forward. I would like to welcome Maya Reddy, who is the co-founder and co-president of her high school's Asian Student Union. And she's also going to ask the panelists a question. And as we're getting Maya ready to join us, hi, Maya. I just wanted to share that Maya reached out to us because they had attended the first panel and they had so many questions and they wanted to engage. And so I thought it was really important to include them in the conversation, especially today. So welcome, Maya, you're up.
Thank you so much. My first question is for all of the panelists, and it is, to what extent should Asian American restaurants subscribe to American food trends? How can we find the balance between traditional culinary customs and the demand of the public?
I just gotta say, I feel like a lot of Asian restaurants are setting the food trends today. If you look at like Instagram, it's everything from like in LA, at least everything is in K-Town, like, which is amazing because I live here, but like Asians make cute as shit food and like it's the stuff that like pops off. Like, you know, I feel like yeah, I don't know, Asian Americans like love to like innovate with, I mean, Asia in general, when you go there, I mean, when you go to the homeland, the motherland, like this stuff is crazy. They're in 2052, like while we're still in like 2021, like the stuff that they're making is nuts, like absolutely bananas bonkers. So like, I think we're actually setting a lot of trends, to be honest, and a lot of restaurants, you know, white owned restaurants, et cetera, are just copying us.
I will say, I think that there is one place where not this generation of Asian American chef, it's our parents' generation that needs to kind of get up with it. It's in the beverage department. Because I think what happened in their generation is they didn't, say Korean restaurants, for example, you go into a Korean restaurant, especially barbecue, right? You go and see the beverage list. It's like 3 kinds of beer. It's a bottle of Henny. It's 3 kinds of, you know, black label Johnny Walker, like black, red, and whatever. And then it's their wine list is like their rep, whoever that was them was the version of bad Napa wine from like Kendall Jackson, and it's like their Merlot, their Pinot Noir, their Chardonnay. It's that list where if someone, and I've spoken to liquor brands and wine reps about this, you need to get someone that speaks their language, like understands and says, hey, that's not taking advantage of them by trying to sell them what they need to get rid of. So maybe those, it's not maybe a trend, but maybe more of these brands, these wine brands and these liquor brands saying, how do we get a Korean, you know, someone who's Korean that speaks a language to say, hey, and understand the market and say, you don't need these crappy wines that this guy is trying to sell you just to get rid of it. Open your list up. You'll have a better, you open your list up and I'll show you some wines that go very well and pair well with barbecue. And maybe you can get another, another demographic in here instead of the guys who just drink beer or people who just drink beer and are pounding soju and are pounding Johnny Walker Black. So that's where I see an opportunity there.
I love Johnny Walker. I don't know what you're talking about.
Me too.
Big fan.
Bring on the Henny. Bring on the Henny.
There's like four types of booze you can get at a Korean barbecue joint.
No, but I think you're right. I think a lot of, Asian American restaurants owned by people of our generation, like when you do look, like they have sort of followed the trends as far as like natural wine lists, really great stellar cocktail programs. They have Asian bents to them, which is awesome, but they're sort of following a lot of the, at least like drinks trends, some of the plateware trends, etc. But I will say, I still think we're leaders in that space. Like if you look at Night Market in LA, they were one of the Chris over at Night Market has been slinging natural wine for over 10 years. Like before it was like super hip, like he used to smuggle bottles into the lengths he would go to smuggle bottles into California was like ridiculous. And there's a little story on foodandwine.com if you want to read about it, but not to self-promote again. But he was on it ahead of time. But again, I think he would, it does, you're right, Dale, it does sort of take someone who can speak the language. He was just into natural wines, he wanted to show that Thai food didn't have to just go with big sweet Rieslings that just dumb down the, the heat and the flavor, that he had a different approach to it. So yeah.
Oh. Yeah, we also have a couple of additional students from the ASU. So I'm gonna tag them in, and Sana, if you wanna jump back, we'll come back too. I wanted to invite Aiden to join us. Aiden, are you with us? I feel like a radio host. Aiden, are you with us? Aiden, you're up.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. My question is, what role can Asian food play in challenging public's perception of Asian people in the wake of COVID-19? What action do both culinary activists and regular people need to take in order to do this?
They need to smash white supremacy violently.
Also use garlic.
We don't have a responsibility to defend ourselves here. We gotta eradicate whiteness and break down whiteness, because that's really what's causing this anti-Asian hate. That's the root of this. We are not the root of this. We are the very unfortunate side effect that would otherwise be thriving.
Mic drop. Yep.
That's all I got. Love your question, Aiden.
We're so lucky to have all of you. I want to invite Gavin, and then Asia, you'll be up with us next, and then we'll kind of check in a little bit. But Gavin, are you with us?
Hi.
Hi, Gavin.
Thank you for having us, like Aiden said. But my question is, how are lesser known countries in Asia, such as Nepal and Bhutan, influencing American taste? Do you think Americans are willing to try foods from countries they are not familiar with?
Do you think, Dale, that people are familiar with the kind of food you're serving? I mean, I guess I'm trying to piggyback onto that a little bit, because it's something that I think I've talked endlessly with almost every food writer and restaurant owner I know. I think that what Gavin's getting at is earlier we were talking about how people are getting to know, right? As Khushbu said, from social media, from us kind of taking over the reins ourselves. But I mean, do people know, right? Is Filipino food, is it a known food?
I'll take it from a Filipino person's point of view. Listen, I'm not here to tell you to eat my food. Fuck you if you don't want to eat my food. I don't care, right? It doesn't matter. We've been taking care of your kids in the hospitals. We've been taking your kids. We've been your nannies for so long. I'm not here to wave the flag. If you don't want to eat my food, it ain't my problem. But I do feel like on the coasts, and this is a coast bias, right? on the coast, you're gonna get people who want to try Nepalese food, Burmese food, who want to try that. I'm from Chicago. I'm from the Midwest. It's a very meat and potatoes town. And guess what happens when you're saying it's a very meat and potatoes town? What are you saying?
Yeah.
It's a very white people's town. So they don't get away from that. And that's just, if you are Burmese and Nepalese in those communities and you are doing your food, you will find people to eat that food, because there are people nowadays that are tired of just steak and potatoes or meat and potatoes. But for us, I'm just saying, like, it's not my responsibility to wave the flag and say, come and eat my food, because you don't want to know, you want to eat my food, then you don't want to know me. If you don't know Filipino food by now, then you don't know me. If you don't know, because especially in New York City, every one of those nannies that are in Central Park are Filipino. They're taking care of your children while you're at school. And when you go to the hospital, those are Filipino nurses. If you don't know who they are, or don't ask them where they're from, or don't know, that's on you, not on us. Like you guys were saying before, Sana, that's on them. That's not on us. It's not our responsibility to sit here and wave the flag. When we go into a room, we introduce ourselves to you. You introduce yourselves to people you don't know. So vice versa. If you don't know who I am and you want to know who I am, eat my food, shake my hand, ask questions. That's how I see it.
Well, I might just want to add one thing there, something that we've learned with OMSOM. So when we first started OMSOM, I couldn't tell you how many people were like, oh, Asian food, especially you're starting with Southeast Asian, that's really niche. And particularly our approach to it, people were even more like, this is not going to work. You're not going to cut through to the masses, because we were like, hey, we are centered first and foremost on this Asian American audience. Everything from our language to who we center to who we partner with is like very Asian American. Everything, right? And some people were like, oh, can't wait to see this fail, because it's so, we weren't trying to pander, we weren't trying to dilute ourselves for accessibility. But what we've actually seen in the first year, kind of like tactically, obviously very small sample size, we're a small business, but what we've seen is that by being unapologetically like, this is who we are for first and foremost, we're not exclusive. We're not like, hey, if you're not Asian, we don't fuck with you. But it was very like, we know who we are. And if you are down to like see all of us, like the multitudes, and not a diluted, palatable, whitewashed way, then we invite you into our community. What we've seen in the past year is that that's actually really resonated, not just with Asian audiences, but with non-Asian audiences as well. So I really push folks to think that like the key to accessing greater audiences is not to dilute yourself and try to be for everyone, because if you try and be for everyone, you end up being for no one. The best thing I think is like when you step into your truth and you own it proudly and loudly, whatever that means to you, I think people will see that. They will see joy, they will see freedom in that. And that is what I think has like worked for us personally. So I think it's not about like, yeah, how can we be for them, but really how can we be us like thoroughly, and how can that actually bring folks in?
Also, like if you want access to a culture, like sometimes you just have to adapt. I think all of us have had to adapt to have access to like mainstream culture in America, right? Like my ass knows as much about Thanksgiving as I know about Diwali, and like why? Why? It's because like I want, my ass wanted to fit in, and like learn the mac and cheese and stuffing is great, like great. But it's the same way, on the other way around. It's like if you want dope Chinese food, like you learn like you learn, like you adapt to it. The language doesn't have to be for you. It doesn't have to explain things for you. You want dope Korean food, you want dope Vietnamese food, start learning what the terms are in these languages. So when you go to, look at a menu, you'll be like, oh, I know that like, if you're at a Thai restaurant and you're vegetarian, you're like, oh, if you see something with J in it, you're like, that's going to be vegetarian just because you like paid attention to the damn menu. So like, you paid attention to the culture. So therefore you deserve access to that culture.
Well said. Well said. Speaking of accessing our culture, our last student question is from Asia, appropriately, Asia, closing out our CULINASIA program. Asia, you are up and on and live. Almost live, really close to live. I see Asia's audio, and I think we're gonna wait for video. And I know we have a lot of, this is actually, I'll say out of all three of the programs, this is our most active chat and Q&A, as to be expected, as we get to the margins of some really, I think, challenging and exciting topics. This is not surprising, but unfortunately, as I've said a couple times in these last programs, all good things must come to an end. But before we do, I'm going to try Asia one more time. If you want to try both audio and video, otherwise I think we can hear you. Hi, Asia. All right, so I'm going to ask if Asia is able to hear me and able to type in the chat. I'm going to give Asia an opportunity to type a question in the chat. But before we close out for the night, I do want to invite the panelists. If there was one, I know we just like went around so fast. If there's one 10 to 15 second wrap up that you want to share, we'll just go around in the order. I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I think our tech team might help Asia with a little mute. Uh-oh. I thought it was going to be us. Our Gen Xers. All right, so
she typed
we're working on our kinks. So I'm going to go ahead and just read Asia's question out loud. And hi, Kim. What can myself, Asia, my classmates, and anyone viewing this program do to help the Asian culinary community maintain the relevance and the economic foundation in the 21st century? Woof. What can we do?
Oh, we are already the foundation. We are already the foundation.
Correct. But also just support, right? Like put your dollars,
yes,
where it is, like post something on social media. You loved a restaurant, you loved a brand, you bought some diaspora turmeric, you bought some Amsam starters, like, post that on your Instagram. Like the more people start like seeing it, especially in their networks, like people that they respect, that they love, and they're like, oh man, like 7 of my friends are using Amsam. Like I need that in my kitchen, like that's how that works, more than anything. So yeah, just support. Like, if you go eat. Yeah. Like if it's your birthday dinner, like pick an Asian restaurant, maybe go to Westchester, check out Dale,
Go to DC, eat at Korea's restaurants, tip more than 20%. And yeah, don't let 20% be the standard.
And also tell that auntie to shut up when they're like, oh, but I can make this better. Then go make it better.
Ask if you can tip the kitchen, and if the restaurant would consider putting a line in their bill to tip line cooks to help them out, because that seems like it's a thing these days. And support the Asian restaurant, and when you go into Asian restaurants, be like, hey, that are affordable and cheap. Say, hey, you should charge more for your restaurant. You should charge more for this. And help them understand that there's a market, that you would pay more for pho. It doesn't need to be $13 for pho. It could be $19, because I know how much work and time goes into the broth and how amazing these ingredients are. It can be that. You're willing to pay for that.
And Katsuya, what's on your heart? I feel you there. What's on your heart, Katsuya?
Well, for me, it's like, I think I wish people will realize the work that's involved in making this beautiful food that we serve and offer, because during this pandemic, I think, a lot of people did cook. And I think, if you did cook and you try to source out your ingredients and you spend time in the kitchen, you realize that it's work. It's work. And try to imagine doing that for 400 people a night. It's not easy. It's not easy. So, have some little understanding, put your dollar where your mouth is, we have to support our staff. We have to support our, restaurant, but, it comes from the community. We need the community, we need their understanding, and we need their support. And, we don't need them to bitch about how expensive the food is. We're not trying to gouge people with the pricing. We're trying to serve things that are sellable at a reasonable price. We've always been like that, and so understand that and support us. Don't be like, I can't believe it was not worth the money. That's some crap, man. That is hurtful.
Yeah, it is hurtful. And I think that we could have a whole nother conversation about just price and labor. And, for me, I know, Sana, earlier you were talking about being a baby, but you are no baby in ideas and creativity. And I think that we've all been able to learn so much from you about equity and fair wages. And, it's something that's really important to us. And just tying all the knots together, when Katsuya said, the restaurant industry is broken, I think it's a really important time to just say to the audience, if you eat food, then just know that just like if you had a friend that was having a horrible day, but just multiply that by the ongoing trauma of the pandemic, you wouldn't kick them while they're down. And restaurants, and specifically Asian American food businesses and restaurants, whether we're financially doing well or not, we're all struggling. So, use your social media and your Yelp to support all of these amazing restaurants and individuals that are here, and all of the amazing restaurants and individuals in your communities. I want to say a special thank you first and foremost to all of our panelists, to Katsuya, to Sana, to Kim, to Kushbu, and to Dale. This has been as anticipated, not just engaging and insightful as a conversation, but a beautiful way to feel like our CULINASIA series has taken on some momentum. I'm also very, very grateful to our Asian Student Union students. Thank you for being here with us. I think we would all love to gather with you at a real table, at Dale's place, at Katsuya's places, somewhere in the future. I'm just putting that out there that we'd love to see you there. And I am also very, very grateful to the Asian Pacific American Initiatives Pool, which is initiated and administered by the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. They have made this program possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you. As I mentioned earlier, the next program in our series is going to be Asian American Farmers Look Back to Go Forward. So a couple of the things that Dale and Kushbu were touching on, we will have Kenny with us from Hobo Wine. So we will be talking about the very, very few but mighty Asian American farmers, and then even fewer and mightier Asian American winemakers. That's going to be on Wednesday, June 23rd. And we will post that information in the chat. And one more note before you go. I know I can't believe we have to go, but you can find us all. We've posted some information about our panelists. I hope you will visit them. I hope you will support them. And before we go, I just have to ask that everyone take a moment to participate in our exit survey. It's brief and it will pop up when you exit the program. We really, really, really value all your thoughts and feedback. This has gone faster than any of our other programs for me. It's really warmed my heart. I'm so honored and grateful to all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm wishing you all the best meals and even better love from the community, from everyone who knows that what you do is valuable, and we're grateful to you. Thank you and good night.